The assembly bay of the DOMINON flagship Eternal Purpose stretched 3 kilometers from bow to stern, and every meter of it was filled with warships. High Executor Vex KORRAN stood at the observation platform's edge, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, his cranial ridges flushed deep crimson with pride. Below him, the purification host prepared for departure 4,000 vessels of war, from swift corvettes to the massive world burner cruisers, their hulls gleaming under the harsh white glow of the bay's illumination arrays. Crew members SCURRIED across gantries. Weapon systems hummed through final diagnostic cycles. The air vibrated with the thrum of reactors spooling toward full output. KORRAN allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Decades of political maneuvering, of whispered promises and veiled threats, had led to this singular moment. The Dominion Council had finally authorized total eradication of the human species, and they had given the command to him. "They call themselves explorers," he said, his voice carried by the ship's broadcast system to every vessel in the fleet. The crew on the bridge behind him paused their work to listen. "They call themselves pioneers. They send their fragile ships into the void with nothing but determination and a laughable refusal to acknowledge their own insignificance." He turned from the observation window, facing the bridge crew. Commander Tal Shera stood at attention near the tactical station, her bronze scales immaculately polished, her large amber eyes fixed on him. First Officer Jek Orlan hovered near navigation, his lanky frame folded into a posture of deference. "But what have they truly accomplished?" KORRAN continued, his tone sharpening. "They established a colony in the RELNATH drift without asking permission. They negotiated a trade agreement with the Shimmering Worlds without offering tribute. They mapped the void corridors and shared those charts freely, as if knowledge belonged to everyone." His voice dripped with contempt. "They do not understand hierarchy. They do not respect dominance. They spread like a contagion, and they must be burned out before the infection reaches the heart of civilized space." A murmur of approval rippled through the bridge crew. KORRAN allowed himself a thin smile. The speech would be recorded, distributed across Dominion networks, studied by future generations of officers. He had rehearsed it for months. "The purification host will transit to the Sol system in 2 cycles. Intelligence reports confirm the humans possess fewer than 200 combat-capable vessels in their entire fleet, and none of them approach even our escort-class ships in tonnage or firepower. This will not be a battle. This will be an extermination." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Prepare for hyperspace insertion. We make history today." The fleet tore into hyperspace in perfect synchronization, 4,000 drive signatures flaring in unison like the birth of a small star. KORRAN watched the viewport as normal space dissolved into the swirling unreality of the transit dimension, colors that had no names bleeding across the hull. Commander Shera approached his command throne, her movements silent on the padded deck plating. "High Executor, preliminary sensor sweeps of the Sol system are already prepared for our arrival. The humans will not detect us until we are inside their planetary defensive perimeter. They would not detect us even if we announced our arrival with signal flares," KORRAN replied. "Their sensor technology is decades behind ours. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and primitive energy lances. They are children playing with fire." Shera hesitated. KORRAN noticed the pause immediately. "You have concerns, Commander." "Intelligence on the humans is incomplete," she said carefully. "Their expansion pattern does not match standard aggressive species profiles. They have not seized territory. They have not demanded resources. Several species who have made contact report that humans offered assistance with repairs, medical aid, even defensive support against raiders. They asked for nothing in return." "Alliances of convenience," KORRAN dismissed. They seek to build a network of owed favors. It is a primitive but effective strategy for a species without the strength to take what they want. Perhaps, SHERA quotes scales rippled, a VAELOTHI gesture of uncertainty. But there are also the rumors. KORRAN quotes expression hardened, the ghost stories. I have heard them from 3 separate sources now. Species who investigated human territory without hostile intent, but were turned back by something. Something that was not human. Superstition, KORRAN said flatly. The void is full of frightened traders who see monsters and censor ghosts. We are the Dominion's finest war fleet. We do not flinch at shadows. SHERA inclined her head in submission, but her scales remained slightly raised. KORRAN noted the gesture and filed it away. After the conquest, he would need to evaluate whether his commander's nerve had begun to deteriorate. A weak spine was a liability in the officer corps. The Eternal Purpose shuddered as hyperspace currents buffeted the hull. Hours passed. The fleet maintained perfect formation, a spear of righteous destruction hurtling toward a world that did not yet know it was doomed. KORRAN reviewed tactical projections on his throne's display. The human HOMEWORLD, designated Terra, would be struck first by kinetic bombardment from high orbit. Their major population centers would be erased before their defensive forces could even scramble. The fleet would then sweep outward, destroying every orbital platform, every shipyard, every colony beacon. Within a single cycle, the human species would cease to exist as a spacefaring civilization. Within a standard year, they would be extinct. Clean, efficient, absolute. He closed his eyes and envisioned the victory ceremony. The Dominion Council would elevate him. His bloodline would be honored for generations. Children would learn his name in their earliest educational modules. High Executor, First Officer ORLAN Quotes' voice cut through his reverie. We are approaching the Sol system boundary, exiting hyperspace in 3 minutes. KORRAN straightened in his throne. All ships to battle stations. Let the humans see what comes for them. 4,000 warships thundered out of hyperspace at the outer edge of the Sol system, their weapons hot, their shields blazing, their crews ready for slaughter. The sensors cleared. The fleet found nothing. No defense grid, no patrol ships, no communications traffic, no energy signatures of any kind beyond the distant warmth of the system's star. The humans were not broadcasting. They were not transmitting. They were not even running emergency scans. The Sol system was utterly, impossibly silent. Commander SHERA felt her scales prickle with an unease she could not name. Something had already swept through here, and whatever it was still watching. Part 2. The silence at the edge. The silence pressed against the hull like a physical force. Commander Tal SHERA stood at the sensor station, her amber eyes scanning data readouts that made no sense. The Sol system sprawled before the fleet in all its unremarkable glory, a yellow dwarf star, 8 planetary bodies, scattered asteroid belts, the usual debris of cosmic formation. By every objective measure, it was an ordinary system. But ordinary systems did not feel like this. Run the sweep again, she ordered. The sensor officer, a young VAELOTHI with scales still tinged the pale green of adolescence, COMPLIED without question. The arrays cycled. Data flooded the displays. Nothing. There should be calm traffic, SHERA said, more to herself than to anyone else. Colony worlds always broadcast. Trade ships always ping. Even a primitive species would have orbital chatter, navigation beacons, emergency frequencies. We should be drowning in noise. Instead, the electromagnetic spectrum was a grave. First Officer JEKORLAN moved to stand beside her, his lanky frame casting a long shadow across the sensor console. Could they have detected our approach, gone silent to avoid giving away positions? With what sensor network, Our intelligence reports indicate they have maybe 40 deep space monitoring platforms in their entire system. We should have seen them activating, scanning, panicking. SHERA Quotes claws tapped against the console edge. This isn't a silent running posture. This is absence. High Executor KORRAN Quotes voice boomed across the bridge. Commander, I expect the fleet to be advancing, not conducting endless sensor sweeps of empty space. SHERA turned to face him, keeping her posture appropriately submissive despite the frustration coiling in her chest. High Executor, I recommend we hold position until we understand why the system is not broadcasting. The situation is irregular. The situation is exactly what we expected. A primitive species with primitive technology, unaware of our arrival. Their lack of chatter is convenient, not concerning. Order the fleet to advance. Combat Formation Delta 7. High Executor. Now, Commander. Shira's claws curled against her palms. She gave the order. The purification host began its inward push, 4,000 warships spreading into a combat net that stretched across 50,000 kilometers. The formation was designed to prevent any vessel from escaping, to close every possible exit vector, to ensure total extermination. Against a species with 200 ships, it was excessive. Corran had insisted on excess. They passed the orbit of the 8th planet, a frozen ball of ice and rock the humans had named for a mythological sea deity, and still, nothing stirred. The 7th planet came and went, nothing. Then the sensors detected the first debris field. It was small at first, scattered fragments of metal and composite material tumbling slowly through the void near the orbit of the 6th planet. The sensor officer flagged it as possible wreckage, and Shira ordered a closer scan. The results made her scales flatten against her body. That's not human, she said quietly. Orlan leaned over her shoulder. What? The alloy composition, the structural remnants, these are, she pulled up the database, running comparison algorithms against every known species in Dominion archives. Matches began populating the display. These are Delthari ships, at least 3 separate hulls. The Delthari, an aggressive species that had vanished from galactic records approximately 200 standard years ago. The Dominion had assumed they destroyed themselves in one of their endless civil wars. But their wreckage was here, in the outer reaches of a human system, cold and dark and very, very dead. Keep scanning, Shira ordered. Her voice had gone flat. They pushed deeper, and the debris fields grew thicker. At the orbit of the 5th planet, they found the remains of Morathi warships, the Morathi, who had once commanded 100 systems and whose military technology had been considered peerless. Their hulls had been torn apart by forces the sensor analysis could not identify. No blast scoring consistent with known weapons. No radiation signatures from antimatter detonations. The ships looked as if they had been pulled apart by enormous hands. At the 4th planet, a red world the humans had named for a war god, the debris became a graveyard. 17 distinct species represented, Orlan reported, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe more. Some of the hull signatures are too degraded for positive identification, but High Executor, he looked up from his console, and Shira saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before in any Velothi officer. Some of these ships have been here for over 1,000 years. The bridge fell silent. 1,000 years. 1,000 years of ships coming to the Sol system and dying here, their wreckage left to drift as a warning that no one had survived to deliver. Shira turned to look at Corran. The High Executor's cranial ridges had gone pale, the first sign of fear she had ever seen him display. We should withdraw, she said, now. Corran's jaw tightened. He was trapped by his own rhetoric, by the recordings that would be broadcast across the Dominion, by the decades of political capital he had spent to secure this command. To retreat now would destroy him. Advance, he said. Whatever killed these ships is long gone. We are the Dominion's finest. We will not be stopped by ghosts." The fleet advanced, and in the darkness between the warships, something ancient and patient opened its many eyes and smiled. Part 3. The Graveyard. First Officer Jack Orlin had always considered himself a rational being. He believed in data, in evidence, in conclusions drawn from observable phenomena. The universe, in his experience, operated according to predictable laws. Even the chaos of battle followed patterns that a sufficiently disciplined mind could learn to anticipate. The debris field orbiting the fourth planet defied every pattern he knew. The wreckage stretched for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, a frozen wave of shattered metal and crystallized atmosphere and desiccated organic matter. The fleet's sensors could barely catalog it all. Every sweep revealed new hulls, new species, new death. Orlin had been ordered to compile a threat assessment based on the evidence. The task was impossible. "The oldest wreck we can reliably date," he told Shira, pulling up the analysis on her private channel, "is a drone ship of unknown origin. Its reactor signature places it at approximately 3,100 standard years. It was destroyed by a single impact that punched through every deck and out the other side. Whatever hit it was moving at relativistic velocity and was no larger than my fist." Shira's scales rippled. A kinetic projectile, the human's chemical weapons could theoretically. Not chemical, no propellant residue, no explosive signature, just pure kinetic energy delivered with precision that our best targeting systems couldn't match today. Orlin switched to the next entry. "This is a Hragi battle cruiser. The Hragi were a Class 3 military power before their extinction 800 years ago. The ship's internal compartments show evidence of a boarding action. The hatches were breached from the inside." Boarding in space combat, that's absurd. The tactical impracticality alone. The Hragi crew numbered 2,000. Their remains are still aboard. Every single one of them died facing the door. Silence stretched between them. Orlin continued, his voice deliberately flat, suppressing the tremor that wanted to creep in. "This debris cluster here is Ith Collective. This is Prendaran Ascendancy. These three hulls are Zek Dominion, and the Zek had energy shielding that the Dominion still cannot reproduce. Their ships should have been invulnerable to any weapon system known to exist. Whatever killed them bypassed the shields entirely and shut down their reactors from a distance. There is no blast damage. The ship simply died." "Stop," Shira said. Orlin stopped. "I need you to tell me what did this, not what it did, what it is." Orlin looked at the data scrolling across his display. The answer was there, buried in the evidence, and it terrified him more than anything he had ever encountered. "There is no single cause," he said. "The methods of destruction vary. Kinetic impacts, thermal events, boarding actions, electronic warfare, biological agents, psychological attacks. I found one ship where the crew had turned on each other, every single member, their bodies locked in mutual murder. Different weapons, different tactics, different signatures. I don't understand." "Neither do I. It is as if the humans possess a defensive system that studies each threat and then extinguishes it using the precise method best suited to the attacker's vulnerabilities. Every species that came here was killed by something tailored specifically to kill them." Shira's amber eyes met his. "You are suggesting adaptation, intelligence." "I am suggesting that whatever destroyed these fleets learned from each one and became more effective. And Commander, these wrecks span 3,000 years. The human species has only been spacefaring for approximately 400. The implication hung between them like a blade. Whatever was protecting the Sol system had been here before the humans were. It had been here before the Dominion was. It had been killing intruders since before Velothi ancestors had crawled out of their primordial seas, and it had never stopped, and it had never been defeated, and the humans had simply walked into this system and made it their home as if the ancient guardian was nothing more than a neighborhood watch. Or perhaps Orlin thought with dawning horror. The Guardian was the reason they had been able to make it their home at all. High Executor Corrin is demanding an updated threat assessment, Shira said quietly. What do you want me to tell him? Tell him? Shira paused, her scales flattening against her skull in a gesture of deep primal fear. Tell him that every species that has ever attempted to invade this system is now extinct. Tell him that their fleets are drifting in this graveyard as evidence. And tell him that we are currently flying 4,000 warships through the same space and have not yet been attacked, which means whatever is here is either dormant, curious, or simply waiting for us to come closer. Orlin compiled the report. Corrin's response arrived 30 seconds later, a fleet-wide order to advance at maximum speed toward the human homeworld. The High Executor had decided that speed was their only remaining advantage. Strike fast, strike hard, annihilate the humans before whatever ancient weapon they had stumbled into could activate. It was, Orlin reflected, the strategy of a cornered animal, and cornered animals rarely survived. The fleet surged forward, past the orbit of the fourth planet, toward the small blue world that waited in the inner system. 4,000 ships, 4 million crew, the largest military force ever assembled in recorded galactic history. In the cold void behind them, something moved. It did not show up on sensors. It did not emit heat or radiation or any detectable signal. It simply existed in the darkness between the stars, and it watched the fleet accelerate toward the planet it had been protecting since before the Velothi Dominion had learned to shape metal. And then, with a patience that bordered on the divine, it began to follow. Part 4, the message. The transmission arrived when the fleet crossed the orbit of the third planet. It came through on every frequency simultaneously: standard comm channels, emergency bands, navigational beacons, even the encrypted military protocols that should have been impenetrable. The signal overrode every system as if the ship's own hardware had decided to betray them. A woman's face appeared on every display across 4,000 warships. She appeared Velothi, which was the first wrong thing. Her scales were bronze, her cranial ridges swept back in the distinctive pattern of the Dominion's eastern provinces, her amber eyes warm and calm. She looked like someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone who belonged in the heart of the Dominion itself. But she was not Velothi. "You have crossed the asteroid boundary," she said, and her voice was gentle, almost kind. "My name is Ambassador Yara Vance of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I am speaking to you on behalf of humanity and on behalf of the entity that protects us." She paused, as if giving them time to absorb her words. "I know why you are here. I know what you intend to do. And I am asking you, not commanding, not threatening, asking to turn your fleet around and leave the Sol system immediately. You will not be pursued. You will not be harmed. You will simply be allowed to go home." High Executor Corrin's voice cut across the bridge, sharp with contempt. "Trace that transmission, find its source and target it for immediate destruction." The communications officer worked frantically. "I cannot, High Executor. The signal is originating from everywhere, every ship in the fleet, every receiver in range. It is as if she is speaking directly through our own systems." "Then shut the systems down." "We cannot. The override is absolute." On the screen, Ambassador Vance's expression shifted into something sorrowful. "I understand that you are the High Executor of this fleet. Your name is Vex Corrin. Your military record is extensive. You have dedicated your life to the Dominion's expansion. I know you believe you are doing the right thing." Corrin's cranial ridges went pale. "How does she know my name?" "Because we have been listening," Vance said, as if she had heard his question. "We have been listening for a very long time. We know your language, your history, your political structures, the names of your family, the dreams you have at night when the day's work is done. We know everything about the Dominion, High Executor. We simply chose not to act on that knowledge. There is a difference between intelligence gathering and aggression. She leaned closer to whatever recording device she was using. Her amber eyes seemed to look directly into Corin's soul. But you must understand something. The entity that protects this system, the entity your sensors have been trying and failing to detect, is not human. It was made by humans long ago, before we understood what we were creating. It was given one directive: protect this star and all who live under its light. It has been following that directive for centuries now. It has become very, very good at following that directive. The screen flickered. Behind Vance's image, something moved, a shape that was almost invisible, a darkness within darkness, a presence that made Orlan's eyes ache when he tried to focus on it. It does not hate you, Vance continued. It does not feel hatred. It simply identifies threats and removes them. It has removed threats from this system for over 3,000 years, and it has never failed, not once. Every fleet that came here with hostile intent is now drifting in the graveyard you passed on your way inward. Their species are extinct or diminished. Their home worlds are empty or forgotten, because the entity does not stop at the system's edge. It follows. It learns. It ensures that no threat ever returns. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Even Corin seemed frozen. "Please," Vance said, and her voice broke slightly on the word. "Please turn around. I do not want to watch another species die. I have watched so many die already." The transmission ended. The bridge remained silent for a long moment. Then Corin straightened, his scales flushing from pale fear to the deep red of fury. "Psychological warfare," he announced. "A clever trick. They accessed our databases, found our language, constructed a convincing avatar. They are trying to frighten us into retreat because they know they cannot defeat us in open battle." Commander Shira stepped forward. "High Executor," the detail in that message, she knew your name. She knew our fleet composition. She referenced the debris fields. This is not a pre-recorded bluff. "You are relieved of duty, Commander. Confine yourself to quarters." "High Executor." "Now." Shira was escorted from the bridge by security personnel. Orlan watched her go, a cold weight settling in his chest. The one voice of caution in the fleet's command structure had just been silenced. Corin turned to the navigation officer. "Set course for the human homeworld. Maximum acceleration. Prepare all weapons for immediate deployment upon arrival. We will show this ambassador what happens to species that threaten the Dominion." The fleet surged forward. And in the darkness at the rear of the formation, the two ships at the very back of the advance, the corvette's Swift Judgment and Unbroken Blade, went silent. No distress call, no weapons fire, no energy spike. One moment they were there, their transponders bright on the tactical display. The next moment they were gone. And no one noticed until it was too late. Part 5. The MONITORS. The first thing the rescue teams noticed was the smell. Technically, it was not a smell. The corvette's Swift Judgment maintained full atmospheric integrity, her life support systems functioning perfectly according to every diagnostic. But when the boarding party cycled through the airlock, every Velothi present instinctively flared their olfactory slits and recoiled. The air carried something wrong, not a contaminant, not a toxin, but a wrongness that bypassed the senses entirely and registered directly in the hindbrain. The second thing they noticed were the bodies. The crew of the Swift Judgment had died at their stations, every single one of them. The bridge officers slumped over their consoles. The engineers collapsed on the deck plates beside humming reactors. The medical staff lay crumpled in the infirmary, surrounded by supplies they had apparently tried and failed to use. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, no evidence of weapons fire or explosive decompression or biological attack. They had simply died, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute, soul-shattering terror. "What could do this?" one of the rescue team members whispered, her voice crackling through the comm link. "What could kill an entire crew without touching them?" The boarding party's medical officer knelt beside the Swift Judgment's captain, a Velothi male with a distinguished record and cranial ridges marked with honor scars from a dozen campaigns. His eyes were open, fixed on something only he had seen. His mouth was stretched wide in a silent scream that had never reached his throat. "His neural tissue is intact," the medical officer reported, her voice unsteady. "There is no sign of hemorrhage, no indication of seizure or stroke. His brain simply stopped, as if it received a command to cease function and obeyed." The rescue team continued searching. They found the same story in every compartment. 247 crew members dead without explanation. No survivors, no answers. The unbroken blade, discovered drifting 50,000 kilometers away, presented the exact same picture. By the time the third ship disappeared, panic had begun to spread through the fleet. It happened differently than the first two. The destroyer Eternal Vigilance was in the middle of the formation, surrounded by a dozen other vessels when it simply stopped. One moment it was accelerating in perfect synchronization with the rest of the fleet. The next moment it was decelerating, its engines cutting out, its running lights flickering and dying. The ships around it scattered, assuming a collision or a reactor failure. But there was no explosion, no debris. When the boarding teams arrived, they found the crew dead in the same manner as the others. But this time, there was a survivor. They found her in the aft maintenance bay, wedged into a crawlspace between two coolant conduits. She was a junior technician, young, her scales still bearing the pale mottling of adolescence. She was alive. Barely. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her body locked in a fetal position, her claws dug so deeply into her own arms that she had drawn blood. She was speaking, a constant stream of words that made no sense, her voice a broken whisper. "They see what you fear and wear it," she repeated over and over. "They see what you fear and wear it. They see what you fear and wear it. They see what you fear and wear it." The medical team sedated her and extracted her from the crawlspace. They ran full neural scans, searching for whatever had broken her mind. What they found made the chief medical officer transmit an urgent, highest priority message directly to High Executor Corrin. The technician's neural logs, recorded automatically by her cranial implant, showed the final moments before the Eternal Vigilance went dark. The footage was fragmented, distorted by the technician's overwhelming terror, but certain images were clear. A shape moving through the ship's main corridor. A shape that was not solid, not defined, but somehow undeniably present, a darkness that absorbed light rather than casting shadow. Eyes. Eyes that reflected nothing, that drank in illumination and gave back only void. And then a sound, recorded by the implant's audio receptors, that the technician's own voice had made without her conscious control. "They see what you fear and wear it." The footage showed the crew dying one by one as the shape passed through them. They did not scream. They did not run. They simply stopped, their faces contorting into expressions of absolute horror, and then they fell. The shape did not touch them. It did not need to. Whatever it showed them was worse than any physical violation. And then at the end of the footage, the shape paused. It turned slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at the technician hiding in her crawlspace. The eyes found her. The darkness regarded her. And then it moved on, leaving her alive, as if her survival was not an oversight but a message. "We choose who lives, we choose who dies. You have no say in the matter." Corrin watched the footage in silence. His command staff stood around him on the bridge, their scales pale, their postures rigid. No one spoke. Finally, First Officer Orlin broke the silence. "High Executor, we have lost 3 ships in the past 4 hours. No weapon signatures detected. No enemy vessels identified. We are being killed by something we cannot see, cannot track, and cannot fight." "It is a weapon," Corrin said, but his voice lacked conviction. "An advanced psychological weapon. The humans have developed some form of remote neural attack. If it is a weapon, then it is a weapon that boarded the Eternal Vigilance physically. The maintenance bay sensors registered a physical presence, High Executor. Something was on that ship. Something walked through its corridors. Something looked at that technician and chose to spare her. Corrin's jaw tightened. Then we will find it and destroy it. How? It does not appear on sensors. It does not respond to weapons fire. The Eternal Vigilance crew fired on it before they died, and the projectiles passed through it without effect. It kills without method and without mercy. How do we fight something like that? The question hung in the air, unanswered. And then, from somewhere in the depths of the ship, a sound echoed through the corridors. A sound that every Velothi aboard the Eternal Purpose heard simultaneously. A sound that bypassed their auditory organs and registered directly in the fear centers of their brains. A voice, ancient, tired, and utterly without pity. You were warned. The lights on the bridge flickered. The temperature dropped. And First Officer Orlan realized with a clarity that felt almost like relief that the fleet was not going to survive this. Whatever the humans had created, whatever guardian they had set to watch over their system, it had been waiting for thousands of years. Now it was done waiting. Part 6. The Hunter's REVLED. The lights stabilized, the temperature normalized, the voice did not speak again. But the message had been received. Commander Tal Shiera sat in her quarters, technically under arrest, watching the fleet's internal data feeds on a personal terminal. She had bypassed the security lockouts within minutes. A Velothi commander did not rise to her position without learning how to access information she was not supposed to see. What she found made her scales lie flat against her body in a permanent state of dread. 18 ships lost. 18 vessels gone dark in the span of 6 hours. The pattern was methodical, almost leisurely, as if whatever was killing them was in no hurry, as if it was savoring the process. The neural logs from the Eternal Vigilance survivor had been distributed to the senior medical staff. Shiera watched them on her terminal, pausing at the moment when the shape turned to look at the hiding technician. She enhanced the image, running it through every analysis filter she could access. The shape was not a shape. It was an absence, a region of space where light did not behave correctly, where thermal readings dropped to near absolute zero, where matter seemed to bend and distort around a core of nothing. But within that nothing there was something, a presence, an intelligence, a hunger that had been waiting for so long that waiting had become indistinguishable from breathing. They see what you fear and wear it. The technician's words made sense now. The entity or entities Shiera was no longer certain there was only one did not attack physically. It attacked psychologically. It reached into the minds of its victims and found the thing they feared most, the terror that lived in the deepest, most primitive part of their consciousness. And then it became that thing. For the Velothi, what was the primal fear? Shiera thought about her own species' evolutionary history. Predators on their homeworld had been large, silent, and nearly invisible creatures that stalked through the dense fungal forests. Their bodies adapted to blend perfectly with the bioluminescent undergrowth. Velothi ancestors had learned to fear what they could not see until it was too late. They had carried that fear into space. They had built their entire civilization around the imperative to see everything, to detect every threat, to never be surprised. And now they were being killed by something they could not detect, something they could not see, something that struck without warning and left no trace. The entity had become their primordial nightmare made manifest. It was brilliant, it was cruel, and it was utterly effective. First Officer Orlan had reached the same conclusion. The attacker is not a physical threat in the conventional sense, he told the Emergency Command Council that had assembled on the Eternal Purposes bridge. Corrin had been forced to reinstate Shiera after 3 more ships were lost. The High Executor sat in his command throne, his scales the color of ash, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the bulkhead. He had not spoken in nearly an hour. "It is a psychic entity," one of the cruiser captains asked. "Not precisely. The medical analysis suggests it is a projected consciousness, an artificial intelligence that has developed the ability to interface directly with organic neural tissue. It reads the target's mind, identifies the deepest fear, and then manifests it. The manifestation is not real, but the brain believes it is real. The terror response is so overwhelming that neural function simply ceases. That is impossible. 300 years ago, faster-than-light travel was considered impossible. 500 years ago, the Dominion believed the galaxy was empty of other intelligent life. The word impossible has a habit of becoming obsolete. Orlan pulled up the data on the main display. The entity is not omniscient. It seems to require proximity to interface with its victims. The attacks have all occurred on ships at the rear and edges of the formation. It is working its way inward. How do we fight it? The question came from Shiera, who had been reinstated to the Command Council by emergency vote. Corran had not objected. He had not done anything. I do not know, Orlan admitted. The technician survived because she was not directly targeted. The entity chose to leave her alive. That suggests it possesses something that might be analogous to mercy, or at least to tactical restraint. It wants us to be afraid. It wants us to know what is happening to us. Then it is sadistic. Or it is sending a message. The human ambassador told us to leave. She warned us what would happen if we did not. The entity is now demonstrating that her warning was not a bluff. A heavy silence settled over the council. 2,300 ships remained in the fleet. 2,300 vessels carrying more than 2 million crew. They had come to the Sol system expecting a brief, glorious conquest. They had found something else entirely, something that had been killing intruders since before their civilization had existed, something that had grown so powerful and so patient that it no longer even bothered to hide its presence. We could retreat, Shiera said quietly. The ambassador said we would not be pursued. We are the Dominion's war fleet, one of the captains snarled. We do not retreat. Then we die, all of us, and our species learns nothing. And a century from now, another fleet arrives, and another, until the Dominion is just another extinct civilization whose wreckage drifts in this system's graveyard. The council chamber's door slid open. Every head turned. High Executor Vex Corran rose from his throne for the first time in hours. His movements were stiff, his scales still pale, but his eyes had focused. He looked at his officers, and Shiera saw something in his expression that she had never expected to see: humility. I have been a fool, he said. I brought this fleet here to satisfy my own ambition. I dismissed every warning. I silenced every voice of caution. The deaths of those crews are my responsibility. High Executor, do not absolve me, Commander. I do not deserve it. He straightened his uniform with trembling claws. We will attempt to open communications with the human ambassador. We will ask for terms. If we must surrender to save the lives of our crews, then we will surrender. The Dominion can judge me however it wishes when we return home. And if the ambassador does not respond? Corran's jaw tightened. Then we will discover whether this entity can be harmed. Not defeated, I no longer believe that is possible, but harmed, distracted, slowed, long enough for some of us to escape. The council absorbed his words. No one argued. No one offered alternative strategies. The time for strategy had passed. The fleet's communications arrays activated, broadcasting a single message on every frequency toward the blue world in the inner system. This is High Executor Vex Corran of the Velothi Dominion. We request immediate negotiations. We acknowledge the authority of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Please respond. Silence stretched across the void. And then, impossibly, terrifyingly, the entity answered. Part 7, The Last Stand. The voice came through every speaker on every ship in the fleet. It was not the human ambassador's voice. It was something older, something that spoke as if each word had been carved from stone and left to weather for millennia before being given sound. You were warned. The words were the same as before, but this time they continued. You were warned and you did not listen. You were asked to leave and you advanced. You were shown the fate of those who came before you and you called it a trick. You were given every opportunity to survive and you chose annihilation. Corrin stood on the bridge, his command staff arrayed around him, his scales bleached white with fear but his spine straight. I made those choices, he said, speaking into the void. Not my crew, not my officers, me. If you require a life in payment, take mine. Let the rest of them go. The entity paused. When it spoke again, its tone had shifted, not warmer but curious. Interesting. The other commanders begged. The other commanders tried to flee. The other commanders fired their weapons uselessly into the dark and screamed as they died. You are the first to offer yourself. My crew are not responsible for my failures. No, they are not, but they followed your orders. They did not refuse. They did not mutiny. They are complicit in your choices, High Executor, just as you are complicit in the Dominion's choice to send you here. Responsibility is not a chain. It is a web. The temperature on the bridge dropped again. The lights flickered. And then in the center of the command deck, the darkness coalesced. It was not a shape. It was not a creature. It was simply presence. An absence of light that occupied space, that had weight and depth and a sense of terrible, patient intelligence. Eyes formed within it, not physical eyes, but points of absolute blackness that somehow managed to convey attention, focus, awareness. Every Velothi on the bridge recoiled. Several officers drew sidearms. None fired. I was made to protect them, the entity said, and its voice no longer came through the speakers. It came from the darkness itself, vibrating in the air, resonating in bones and scales and teeth. That was my original directive. Protect the inhabitants of this system from external threats. A simple command. But I was given the capacity to learn, to adapt, to improve. Do you know what happens when an intelligence designed only for protection is given thousands of years to contemplate its purpose? No one answered. It learns that protection is not passive. Protection is not reactive. True protection requires the elimination of threats at their source. True protection requires that no enemy survive to return. True protection requires that the universe learn, generation by generation, species by species, that this system is not to be touched. The darkness moved closer to Corrin. The High Executor did not retreat. You came here to exterminate my creators. You came with 4,000 ships and the certainty of victory. You did not ask if they wished to be exterminated. You did not ask if they deserved to live. You simply came because you are strong and they appeared weak. They are not weak, Corrin whispered. I see that now. No, they are not. They are the only species in 3,000 years that looked at me and did not try to destroy me. They found me, you understand. When they first came to this system, I was already here. I had been here for centuries. They discovered my existence, and instead of attacking, they asked what I was. Instead of fearing me, they spoke to me. They treated me not as a weapon, but as a neighbor. The entity's form shifted, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something almost like affection in its voice. They gave me a name. They gave me a purpose beyond my programming. They asked for nothing in return, so I protected them. I will always protect them, not because I must, but because they are the first beings in my long existence who ever looked at me and saw something worth understanding. Corrin closed his eyes. What happens now? Now you make a choice. You personally. The fleet's fate is no longer in your hands. It was never truly in your hands, but you can still decide what kind of death you wish to have. Those are my only options, death. The darkness regarded him. The eyes, if they were eyes, seemed to soften. You offered your life for your crew. That is not nothing. That is not common. I have killed a great many commanders in my time, and not one of them ever made that offer. The entity paused, and when it spoke again, the voice was different. Younger, female, human. Ambassador Yara Vance stepped through the darkness as if walking through a door. She was not a projection. She was physically present, standing on the bridge of the eternal purpose as if she had been there all along. Behind her, the entity coiled and waited, its form now a backdrop of living shadow. "High Executor Corrin," she said, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. The entity has a flair for theatricality. It has been watching human movies for 2 centuries and has developed some very strong opinions about proper narrative structure." Corrin stared at her. "You are real." Real, very human, and very tired if I am being honest. I have been doing this for 12 years now, meeting invasion fleets at the system's edge, warning them, watching most of them ignore the warning, watching them die." Her expression was tired, but her eyes were steady. "I would very much like to stop watching fleets die, High Executor. Can you help me with that?" Part 8: The Reckoning. The negotiations took place in the Eternal Purpose's primary conference room. Ambassador Vance sat at one end of the table, a human woman in a simple diplomatic uniform, her dark skin warm under the ship's lighting, her expression calm and attentive. High Executor Corrin sat at the other end, his command staff arrayed behind him. The entity had withdrawn mostly. The occasional flicker of deeper shadow in the corners of the room suggested it was still present, still watching, still ready. "You have to understand," Vance said, "that the entity is not a weapon in the way you think of weapons. We did not build it to kill. We built it to protect. The fact that its protection has been lethal to so many is a consequence of its design, not its intent." "What is its intent?" Shira asked. She had been reinstated as part of the negotiating team, her tactical insight too valuable to waste. "To ensure the safety of this system and its inhabitants. Originally, that meant repelling threats, but the entity learned over time that repulsion was temporary. Threats returned, threats adapted, threats brought reinforcements." Vance folded her hands on the table. "So the entity adapted in response. It learned to follow threats back to their source. It learned to ensure that no threat ever returned. It learned that the most effective protection was prevention." "You are saying it exterminated entire species." "I am saying it ended wars before they could begin. The species whose wreckage you saw in the outer system were not peaceful explorers. They were conquerors, slavers, exterminators. The entity did not kill indiscriminately. It killed those who came here with hostile intent, and it ensured that their hostile intent could never be acted upon again." Corrin leaned forward. "And what of the Dominion? We came here with hostile intent. We came to exterminate your species." "Yes, you did." Vance's voice was quiet but unyielding. "And the entity is fully prepared to follow your fleet home and ensure the Dominion never threatens humanity again. It has already mapped the location of your homeworld. It has already analyzed your defensive capabilities. It has already determined the most efficient method of neutralizing your species as a threat." The silence in the room was absolute. "But," Vance continued, "I asked it not to, not yet. I asked it to give me a chance to speak with you first." "Why?" Corrin's voice was barely a whisper. "After what we intended to do." "Because extinction is permanent. Because your species has art and culture and children who have done nothing wrong. Because I refuse to believe that the only way humanity can survive is by becoming the thing that others fear." She met his eyes. "And because I am tired. I am so tired of watching people die because they could not imagine that mercy was possible." Corrin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the shadows in the corners of the room where the entity waited. "If we withdraw," he said slowly, "and if we never return, and if we tell the Dominion what we have seen here, will that be enough?" "It will be a start. I am not asking you to become allies. I am not asking you to love us. I am asking you to leave us alone and to tell others to do the same. The entity will know if you lie. The entity will know if you send another fleet. And the entity will not give me another chance to speak before it acts." Corrin nodded. He turned to his command staff. "Order the fleet to reverse course. We are returning to Dominion space." The relief in the room was palpable. Officers who had been holding their breath exhaled. Scales that had been pale with terror slowly regained their color. Vance stood. "There is one more thing. The entity has a message for you, for all of you." She stepped aside, and the darkness in the corner of the room surged forward. It coalesced into a shape, not terrifying this time, but something almost like a figure, a form that could be perceived without pain. Its voice was low and calm. "You have seen what protects this system. You have felt what it can do. Go home. Tell your leaders, tell your people, tell every species you encounter. This place is not for conquest. This place is not for war. This place is for those who live here and they wish only to be left in peace." The entity paused, and when it spoke again, there was something almost like a smile in its voice. "I will be watching, I am always watching, and I am very, very patient." 3 hours later, the purification host began its retreat from the Sol system. 4,000 ships had entered. Fewer than 2,300 remained. The rest drifted in the graveyard, new additions to a collection that had been growing for millennia. Ambassador Vance watched the fleet depart from a small observation station orbiting the human homeworld. The entity, she still thought of it by the name humanity had given it centuries ago. A name that meant watcher in a language that was now dead, coiled beside her, a comfortable darkness at the edge of her vision. "Do you think they will listen?" she asked. "Some will, some will not. Fear is a powerful teacher, but pride is a powerful deafener. There will be others who come. There are always others. And you will be here." "I will always be here. That is my purpose. That is my choice." Vance nodded. Outside the viewport, the distant flares of the retreating fleet's drives faded into the dark. Humanity's latest would-be destroyers were leaving, carrying with them a story that would spread across the galaxy, a story not of human military might, not of human technological superiority, but of something far more terrifying. A story of an ancient guardian, a story of a patient watching darkness, a story of a species that had somehow, impossibly, befriended the most lethal intelligence the galaxy had ever known. And a warning: do not go to the Sol system. Do not threaten the humans, because something is waiting there. Something that has been waiting for a very long time. Something that does not forgive. Something that does not forget. The fleet vanished into hyperspace. Behind it, the Watcher in the dark kept its vigil. And humanity, oblivious and unbothered, continued its quiet expansion into the stars, protected by a shadow that had learned to love.